Are thirst traps the new military recruitment strategy? New reporting from Mint Press News examines the phenomenon of service members, particularly those who are Gen Z, who are using TikTok and other platforms on social media, to give followers a glimpse into their life in the military. As Mint Press writes, many of these members are attractive young women posting, quote, sexually suggestive content while promoting Army life.
One popular service member on military TikTok, or hashtag MilTalk, is Haley Lujan, psychological operations specialist who has 731,000 TikTok followers who watch videos of her telling her audience things like being a soldier is the, quote, coolest job in the world, and to not go to college and become a soldier instead. According to Mint Press, Lujan once posted a video titled Not Endorsed by the DoD with a winky emoji next to it. She also premiered in a short film in which she lured in a man with her beauty in one clip, and in the next, he was signing up for the military. Senior staff writer at Mint Press News, Alan McLeod, joins us now to discuss further. Alan, thanks for coming on the show.
It's great to be with you guys. How are you?
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. So what is the breakdown here of MilTalk that is just individuals really genuinely enjoying their military life and making videos about it versus PSYOP campaigns by the military itself?
You know, that's a question that's very difficult to answer with any certainty. I did email the Department of Defense. I did not get a response from them. So it's clear that they don't really want to be talking about this, which is one reason why the media should be looking at this. Of course, there are plenty of people just making content about their military lives on places like TikTok or Instagram or Facebook and are pretty much freelancers. But there are others that seem so professional and seem to be pitching the idea of joining the military and this hardcore recruitment drive so much that you do start to get a little suspicious of this. For instance, who you mentioned before, Haley Lujan, she now has just exploded in popularity. She has nearly 750,000 followers on TikTok alone. And in between the sexually suggestive content, the thirst traps and the memes she posts, there's a whole lot of really hardcore join the military messaging in there, which is pretty surprising. You know, if you read her comments, so many of the people are saying, this is a PSYOP, you're a glowy, this is Fed posting, etc. But it really gets pretty murky and dark when you actually realize that she literally is a PSYOP in the sense that she is a psychological operations specialist with the US Army. So it's really unclear whether she's doing this on her own with the tacit approval of the military or whether the forces that be are actually much more involved than they seem. And of course, you know, the military does encourage people to post stuff about their life in there. In fact, the US Air Force's own manual actually says that, you know, one of the reasons why they want people posting is that they might encourage people to join up into the Air Force or other branches of the military. But it also, on the same document, warns all servicemen that posting the wrong kind of content, which basically means content that doesn't show the military in a positive light, content about PTSD or sexual assault or just how your recruiters lie to you, can jeopardize your career in the military. So it's very clear the sorts of content they want out there. And I think this is just this crazy new, brave new world of recruitment to Gen Z right now.
A reason I've appreciated TikTok as a zillennial user of TikTok is that it's a little more genuine and real and honest than other social media platforms. And I've seen a lot of videos personally, maybe it's my algorithm, of members of the military being asked by their friends who are also in the service, do you regret joining the US military? And a lot of them saying, yes. So how much can we understand this to be trying to counteract that narrative that's on TikTok and other platforms that Gen Z uses?
Yeah, I think so. Generation Z is really historic in its rejection of the military. Right now, we have a recruitment crisis within all branches of the US military. The Army is down tens of thousands of recruits. It's missing its targets by 10, 20, 30% every year. There was a recent study that came out that said only 9% of Generation Z have any interest whatsoever in serving. And so really the military is in a bit of a crisis here. They've got a bad reputation. The figures are as low as they ever have been since the draft was abolished in the early 70s. And so really, the military has to target Generation Z because that is the generation that will be growing up enlisting right now. And they're trying to find new ways of doing this. And one way is, turning the army into like an esports team or starting to stream on Twitch or just putting out content on TikTok and other platforms that young people use to try to sort of combat some of the sort of more general anti-war tones that are really out there right now.
I wonder if that will be an effective recruitment strategy, though, because the majority of individuals who are eligible to serve in the military right now, for at least the age limit, are not physically or mentally able to pass the requirements for joining the military. So is there a way that the military can address those concerns in terms of physical fitness?
Yeah, sure, you're right. This generation, for a whole multitude of reasons, is not growing up as mentally and physically able as previous generations. And that presents to the military a huge difficulty. For decades now, this has actually been happening. And generally, what the military does is relax its requirements to create sort of secondary armies of people who can join up. So if your eyesight isn't very good, they'll reduce they'll break or bend some rules for you, or perhaps if you're overweight. I think ultimately one of the goals might be to, try and build this sort of irregular army that they've been doing for the last couple of decades. But another one might just be to farm it out to private contractors or even people who are not from the United States, like a lot of European countries do. For instance, Great Britain or France, who recruit people from all over the world to join their military with the promise of citizenship or wealth at the end of the line.
So I'm curious, I think, is it ethical to use thirst traps to recruit people to the U.S. military? But then I have this second thought, which is there any ethical way to recruit people to the U.S. military, given what the U.S. military has been up to for the better half of a century? And then I think about their typical recruiting tactics of promising tuition to be paid for and a better life economically than is typically offered if you grow up working class in the United States. Then I think of recruiting through movies like Top Gun, which we know received a lot of funding and equipment from the U.S. military and inspired a lot of people to enlist. Then I think about also video games like Call of Duty. So what do we make of the difference between thirst traps versus other recruiting tactics?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess we could say that pretty much every company uses thirst traps, whether it's car companies or soda companies or whatever. There are always attractive people in these advertisements, and the whole point is to try to get you in a sort of very base level to associate lust with their product. But the difference is that they're not selling sodas or cars here. They're selling an 8-year recruitment into the world's biggest killing machine, effectively, aren't they? And so I think that's really where the line gets a little bit blurry. This is not, some sort of little purchase that you can do and throw away. This is a huge commitment and to completely change your life. And so I think we have to be absolutely clear. At least people should know whether the military is actually doing this. And so much of this actually works because the army and other branches are really living in this kind of gray zone where maybe behind the scenes they will admit that they are helping this. They are trying to do these psychological operations, but up front they don't want people to know, because immediately once you start realizing that a lot of the media we consume right now, whether it's movies or video games or TV shows that have been affected by the Pentagon, once you start knowing that, your guard goes up and you start becoming a lot more critical of it. So, for instance, some of my research has been piggybacking on a lot of other great researchers out there that have found through the use of the Freedom of Information Act that the Pentagon has been involved in almost 10,000 movies and TV shows in the last few decades. And this ranges from movies like Top Gun, where documents show that the Pentagon was actually providing a sort of quid pro quo to the producers. They actually say that they want to weave in their key talking points, end quote, into stories, into the storyline of Top Gun in exchange for using all of their great hardware and, their planes, their battleships, etc. To things like video games, where, these are huge things that people will play. Games like Call of Duty have got intimate involvement with the Department of Defense as well, whereby the DoD helps helps build narratives, helps the producers of these games. But in exchange, they want a sort of much more pro-war message or pro-US, pro-military message in there. And so games like Call of Duty will actually mirror real-life things that have gone on, and then even take off some of the more unsavory aspects of their storyline. I'm thinking specifically one of the recent Call of Duty games has a scene called the Highway of Death, which is based on something that actually happened in Iraq in the early 90s, whereby the US military trapped the fleeing Iraqi army and carried out an absolute massacre, which even people like General Colin Powell said was pretty much akin to a war crime. But in the Call of Duty games, the history of that is reversed, and it's actually the Russians doing that, not the Americans. And so these sorts of little snippets really give you an insight into how the Department of Defense really tries to control its image through pop culture. And that is something that is really at the tip of the propaganda sphere, and that very few people are actually aware is going on.
I actually recently played that level on Call of Duty, so that's very illuminating to me. And it sure is an interesting tactic to try to recruit young men who hope that they'll meet hot women, as the military, of course, is in the midst of the accusations of covering up sexual assaults. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time, but thank you, Alan, so much for joining us today on Rising.
It was great to be with you.